Hello everyone! In today's episode we've got two dishes, stir-fried cabbage or 肉炒包菜, and Taiwanese braised pork belly or 卤肉, either with rice fan or noodles min.
So let's start by choosing a good piece of pork belly. So this piece of pork belly weighs a little over 900 grams. Let me just show you how it looks like. Okay, so this is the skin side. Over here you can see the layers of the pork belly. You can see that this side has more fat, and the layers are more firmly attached together. This part with more fat and better attachment of layers is better for stir frying. And then this section is taken from the ribs. So you can see under here that we have some pieces of cartilage under here. These are great. When you braise them for a long time, they will soften. But as you can see, the layers here, they're delaminating a little bit. So it's not as ideal for stir frying. So we're gonna be making two dishes with this pork belly. We're going to be making braised pork. It is a special dish in Taiwan. And we're also going to be making a stir-fried cabbage with a little bit of pork belly. So as I said, this part here, this is ideal part on the right side for making stir-fry. And on the left side here, we have the part that's ideal for making the braised pork. So let's cut this up. There's one more thing I need to mention. Over here you can see, well, you can't really see it, but there are some hairs on this skin. You probably can't tell, but there are hairs if you feel it, and we're going to need to burn those off, especially if you intend to use the skin for anything. So for the stir-fried pork, for the stir-fried cabbage with pork belly, I do not need the skin, so I'm going to cut that right off. But for this, I do want the skin, so I'm going to burn that skin in the wok later. You'll see. So for now, let's cut off a small portion according to how much we need for the stir-fry cabbage, which is about 150 grams. So this is over 900 grams, so that's probably about here. Okay, so this part we use for braising. And now we're gonna get rid of the skin here because I don't need it. Okay, so here is our skinless pork belly. You can see there's a good layer of fat on the top. So this here, you can see there's a little membrane down here, the silver skin. This should be pretty easy to peel out. So because we're stir frying this pork, you do need to get rid of the silver skin here because you don't want to be chewing on that. If you're braising this section of the pork, then well, that'll be fine. It will soften up after hours of braising. The main purpose of the pork belly and stir fries cabbage is to just provide some fat, some flavor. So it's not really about the tenderness of the meat, so you don't need to be complete with removing the silver skin, although you still want to remove most of it. Like as long as you remove the main bit, that's pretty fine. There you go, that's mostly trimmed up. There's very fatty pork belly, which is pretty normal, but that's fine because again, the purpose is not really to be eating the pork, but just to get the fat and the flavor coming out. All right, that's great. So this is our small piece of pork belly, and this here will be used for our braised pork. We'll keep the skin on, but I'll burn off the skin later. For now, let's cut up this pork into stir-fry pieces. So let me put this aside. So pay attention to the grain. Now, when you buy pork belly, usually the grain, they'll cut it with the grain. So you can see the grain here. It's running the long way. So you want to cut against the grain for this. So that will be this way. You want to cut perpendicular to the grain. You cannot cut the slices too thick because number one, the slices will be not as tender, and number two, you won't be able to render out the fat properly if the slices are too thick. So try to cut the slices a little bit thinner. Fresh pork belly might be slightly tricky to cut. You can put this pork belly in the freezer for about 15 minutes, which will firm it up a little bit and make it easier to cut if you wish. So you can see that the pieces are mostly fat, but that's okay because we're looking mostly for the fragrance that it provides. So this is ideal. It's detaching a little bit, but if I were to cut this side, it would detach more, and also that cartilage would really get in the way. I'm going to need to process this bit because it's thicker. The slices cannot be too thick. Like this is a little bit too thick, so I'll adjust this. Alright, so this is what you should have. You can see that the slices are almost all fat. So if I were to put this in the braising liquid, that would just be, it would just release a lot of oil and it would be greasy. So not ideal. So we'll just use the more fatty part of the pork belly for stir frying. And I think I have a couple pieces which are essentially just all fat, so I might as well just cut them up and use that as lard. So get a little bit of meat here. So I got some pork belly, very fatty. Okay, and then we got the leaner portion of the pork belly right here. This slab that weighs about maybe 750 grams, so maybe a little bit more, but I'm subtracting the weight of this cartilage right here. It does get soft if you braise it long enough, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to be searing off the skin to burn the hairs off the skin, and then we'll rinse that off, and then we'll blanch this for about 10 minutes so that it gets rid of that porky smell. After that, we're going to cut it into small pieces and braise it. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing with this pork belly. I'll get to that in a second. This piece of skin, I don't really have much use for it, but I guess I can sear off the skin on this one too and then braise the skin. Alright, I'll get back to you guys in a minute. Alright, we're going to burn the pork skin now. So I've heated the wok a little bit and it's smoking hot. I've turned the heat down just so that it doesn't smoke fumes everywhere. Make sure you turn your exhaust hood on. Let's burn that pork belly. You can see that it's bubbling up a little bit, but it's not burnt yet. So keep burning it. Alright, so I've blackened the skin a little more, and now this is what it looks like. So this is what you want to see. You want to get those hairs burnt all off, and then we'll rinse it and get ready for the next step. Alright, so take your pork belly. That's been blackened. You can see that the fat was starting to render out a little bit, but that's okay. Make sure that the hairs are nicely burnt off, but you do need to rinse the skin now and also the pork itself because you want to get rid of that black skin, because if you leave that blackness on there, it's gonna, make it bitter. The skin is pretty tough, so don't worry about tearing it. We're just gonna scrape that brown blackened bits right off. At the same time, we're going to get rid of the blood and impurities inside that pork belly, which we're going to do by parboiling it. Do not rinse the pork in a basin because you'll have the bacteria contaminating your basin and the entire thing. Keep it within a bowl like this. Okay, that looks pretty good. We're going to get ready to blanch this. To blanch the pork belly, here I've got some water and I have a few pieces of ginger and spring onions in here. So these will just clear some of the porky smell. We're also going to add about, that was somewhere between 1 and 2 tablespoons of cooking wine. And we're going to add the pork belly in here while it's still cold. Okay. It's just enough water to cover the pork belly. It doesn't need to be fully covered. And we'll turn on the heat. You can see what's coming out of that pork belly. There's a lot of stuff that you don't really want to eat in there, right? So we'll just let it blanch for about 10 minutes. We don't need to cook the pork all the way through, just enough to get rid of that smell. And you can flip the pork over halfway if you want to get down the skin side as well. Once the pork is blanched, we'll just take it out and put it into some cold water. You can actually poke the pork with a chopstick. If it goes through easily, it means you fully cooked the pork, which is perfectly fine. but I didn't fully cook the pork here, so it's a little bit so you can't quite poke it through. All right, we've put it in there. Try not to make a mess as much as I did. But we're just gonna let the pork cool down a little bit. I gotta clean up now because I just did that. I'll come back in a bit. Now let's cut up the pork belly into small pieces. It's still warm. We're going to just cut this into small pieces. It's not gonna be all the way cooked through, so don't be shocked. That's normal because we're not intending to cook this all the way through. What we are gonna do now is cut into small cubes. You can see that the pork has firmed up a little bit though, so it is a little bit easier to cut. So see a piece of chunk here with that beautiful skin? That skin's gonna get nice and melty soft later. So what we want is a piece about, we're gonna quarter this piece. So just to show you what the ideal size is. Okay, so this is what you're looking for one piece of the braised pork. Yes, you want them to be in nice small pieces. This also helps them cook faster. So some pieces will have skin, which is a nice treat. Some won't, but that's okay. If the pieces are rather lean, cut them smaller because they'll be dry. And you kind of want to incorporate them into the sauce. Okay. That's those. And we're just going to repeat this process until we finish with all the pork belly. You'll come to the middle few pieces here that have some of the cartilage on there that goes through. Don't worry too much about that. That will just melt away nicely when you braise it for an hour or more. Just cut those pieces slightly smaller.
Here's the chopped up pork. We'll now set it aside and prepare the cabbage. We'll need 300 grams of cabbage, but I'm just using the firm inner leaves that can withstand cooking. Save the outer leaves for salad. We'll also need 5 grams of dried chilies and 20 grams of garlic. We'll also need some fermented black beans, or douqu. These are preserved in oil and stored in a glass jar, but you can also find them in plastic bags. Whole beans are preferred over fermented black bean sauce, but the sauce form will work if that's what you have. Peel off the outer leaves of the cabbage and cut the inner leaves into small pieces. I apologize if the camera is out of focus for this part. You can see that I'm working my way around the cabbage leaves to remove the firm bits to use for this dish. The tender bits can be saved for salad, but if you wish to use them to cook them in this dish, they should be added towards the end of cooking after the firm bits have cooked through to prevent them from becoming overly soft. We'll remove the bottom half of the core of the cabbage as it may have residual dirt on it. However, the top half of the core can be used. Just be sure to cut it into small pieces. We'll cut the cabbage in half and process the cabbage leaves the same way as before. However, notice that some of the inner leaves are thicker. To ensure everything cooks at the same time, I cut at an angle for some of these pieces to ensure an even thickness. Finally, cut the top half of the core into very small pieces. That's one half of the cabbage done, and we'll repeat the process with the other half of the cabbage. We'll now set the cabbage aside. Crush and mince the garlic cloves, then mince them coarsely and set them aside. This will be used to add freshness and aroma to the stir-fried cabbage. We'll now prepare some ingredients for the Taiwanese Braised Pork Belly. You can use 5 spice powder to save time, but I highly recommend putting together some whole spices if you can. We'll need 3 small bay leaves, a stick of cinnamon, a few pieces of dried orange peel, 5 grams of star anise, a few cloves, and 1 teaspoon of fennel seeds. Use a spice bag like this if you have one to contain the spices so that they can easily be fished out after cooking. If you can't find dried orange peels in the store, you can make your own like I did by cutting a fresh orange and saving the peels. Roast the peels in an oven at 120 degrees Celsius or 250 degrees Fahrenheit for a few minutes. Keep an eye on them as they can burn very quickly. Tie up the spice bag and set it aside. We'll cut a chunk of ginger into thick slices and set them aside. This will simply add a bit of fresh flavor to the pork. We'll prepare a small onion by cutting it in half and mincing it not too coarsely. We'll start by slicing from the top to the bottom on each onion half. Then, rotate each half 90 degrees and slice the other way. This makes mincing onions easy without having to make horizontal cuts. Finally, have a small chunk of rock sugar ready, about 20 grams. We're now ready to cook. We'll heat up the wok until smoking, and then add in some pork fat back and let the lard render out. You may use oil if you don't have lard. Once the pork fat is rendered and crispy, we'll add 150 grams of sliced skinless pork belly as we prepared earlier. Again, render the lard out of the pork. This will add both flavor and aroma to the cabbage. You can tilt the wok and push the pork belly slices to the side of the wok to give them a better char. Turn on the exhaust hood for the next step. We'll add our dried chilies and just stir fry them very briefly. Then we'll add in the inner cabbage leaves and stir them as well. If you choose to use the outer leaves of the cabbage for this dish in addition to the inner leaves, add them towards the end of cooking to ensure they don't soften too much. Again, you can tilt the wok and push the cabbage to the side of the wok to improve the wok speed. Add in 1 teaspoon of fermented black beans. Note that these are not broad beans, and therefore this dish is G6PD deficiency friendly. Then add in the minced garlic and stir fry briefly. We want the garlic to be half cooked for the perfect balance of freshness and aroma. Turn the heat to low to prevent the garlic from burning, then drizzle in 1 tablespoon of light soy sauce from the side of the wok and stir it in. We'll add a pinch of white pepper and a half teaspoon of salt. Finally, turn the heat back up and toss the wok to distribute the seasonings evenly. We only add salt at the very end, as adding it too early may draw out moisture from the cabbage, which would affect the texture and aroma when served. pour the cabbage out onto a serving plate. To clean the wok quickly, deglaze the wok with some water. Scrape off any bits which are stuck to the wok and pour the water out. Finish the cabbage with a drizzle of sesame oil, and it's ready to serve. Heat up some oil in a clean wok. Once it's smoking, add the minced onion and sliced ginger, then fry until fragrant. Then, add in the pork belly pieces prepared earlier. Stir them and cook for a few minutes until it's no longer pink. Add some water to the wok to prevent any stuck onions from burning, then dissolve the rock sugar into the water. If you don't have rock sugar, both regular brown sugar and white sugar will work just fine. You may now turn off the exhaust hood and add some more water. We'll now add some light soy sauce for its savory flavor and dark soy sauce to adjust the color. Be conservative if it's your first time cooking this, as you can always add more later, but it's hard to adjust if you add it too much. I decided to add a bit more light and dark soy sauce here. In total, I used 1/3 cup of light soy sauce and 1/4 cup of dark soy sauce, but feel free to tweak the ratios to your taste. Just be mindful that the sauce will be greatly reduced towards the end. Add in a spice bag and optionally some dried rehydrated shiitake mushrooms, which will absorb that delicious braising liquid. You may also add the rehydrating water to the stock if you wish, which will deliver more umami flavor, and thus there will be no need to add monosodium glutamate. Add enough water to cover everything and let it simmer on low heat for at least 30 minutes or until the pork is tender to your liking. Once you're happy with the tenderness, turn the heat up to high to reduce the sauce. As you can see here, I've greatly reduced the sauce after letting it cook for 45 minutes, as I prefer the pork to be meltingly soft for this dish. Turn off the heat once the sauce is reduced to your liking. The pork has taken on a deep brown color and is fragrant from the whole spices simmered with the sauce. It tastes deeply savory and pairs well with plain steamed rice or thick noodles, either rice or wheat noodles. I do not recommend serving this with thin noodles. Look at those luscious cubes of pork belly. However, the sauce is still slightly thin. We'll prepare some cornstarch slurry to thicken the sauce. The desired thickness is up to you, but the pork belly should at least be able to be glazed with the sauce. Stir the cornstarch slurry into the pork until the sauce thickens. And there you have it, a delicious savory braised pork belly perfect with rice or noodles, otherwise known as lu rou fan or lu rou min, and equally delicious home-style stir-fried cabbage, otherwise known as 肉炒包菜. I hope you enjoyed these two recipes.